My name is Lorianne Stallings. I'm an epidemiologist, and one of my roles is as the Deputy Director, the Evaluation Lead, and the Outreach Lead for the High Plains Intermountain Center for Agriculture, Safety, and Health, or as we rather prefer to call it, HICAHS. We've been conducting research, prevention, and educational programs for agriculture, safety, and health here at Colorado State University since 1991. We're honored to be co-hosting this discussion with the National Children's Center for Rural and Agricultural Health and Safety, and which is based at Marshfield, in Marshfield, Wisconsin. They've been conducting health and safety for all children exposed to hazards in agricultural communities and rural environments since 1997. Together, we represent 2 of the 11 Centers for Agriculture, Safety, and Health that are supported by the National Institutes of Occupational Health and Safety, which is housed within the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Across our centers, we've seen how many of these informal discussions with people from who have diverse roles in practice and research in agriculture, safety, and health have really spurred new ideas in how to work across our different programs and to really address some of the important issues in agriculture, safety, and health. As many of you know, I assume most of those of you who have joined us today are aware that living and working on a farm or ranch can provide valuable skills and tools for healthy growth and development for youth. However, farming and ranches are among the most dangerous work sites in the United States, and living and working in those work sites provide hazards, as well as visiting farms, particularly for youth who are less familiar with some of the hazards that are there. So today we'd like to discuss how research can improve the safety of youth who visit and work and live on farms, and then what partnerships are key to moving from research to practice. Before we begin, Colorado State University is engaged and invested in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as part of that engagement and investment, we have developed what we call the Colorado State University Land Acknowledgement. And I'd like to share that with you before we begin.
Colorado State University acknowledges with respect that the land we are on today is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and peoples.
This was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for numerous other Native nations.
We recognize the indigenous peoples as original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it.
As these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, the ties nations have to their traditional homelands are renewed and reaffirmed.
CSU is a land-grant institution, and we accept that our mission must encompass access to education and inclusion.
And significantly, that our founding came at a dire cost to Native nations and peoples whose land this university was built upon.
This acknowledgement is the education and inclusion we must practice in recognizing our institutional history, responsibility, and commitment.
So thank you. Just a little bit of understanding about what the plan for today is. We're going to spend about an hour in a moderated panel discussion, and then we'll move to our breakout rooms for the remainder of the time. During the panel discussion, please feel free to interact with the panelists using the chat. That we've dedicated time to posing audience questions to the panel. Panelists, please leave your videos on, but all other attendees, please leave your videos off and microphones muted during the panel discussion to help us with bandwidth. You can turn those on once we enter the breakout rooms. We're recording the panel discussion and broadcasting now live to Facebook, but we'll stop both recordings and the interaction on Facebook at the conclusion of the panel, and will not be recording the broadcasting the information that goes on in the breakout rooms. At any point, if you have technical issues, please reach out to Morgan Valley in the chat or via email. And Morgan will provide her email in the chat for you, in the message chat for you. With that, we're going to move to the introduction of the panelists. Dr. D. Jepsen has been with the Ohio State University Agriculture Safety and Health Program since 1992, and I think I've known her for most of that time. She's a responsibility for teaching, extension, and research in occupational safety and health. Her outreach efforts revolve around the current issues in farm and rural safety, and she provides community training programs for high school classrooms, farm families and workers, agricultural industry groups, and the general public. Dr. Jepsen collaborates with a variety of stakeholders and organizations to design injury prevention programs that meet the needs of agricultural workers, no matter what the age or experience level, because maintaining a high quality of life is a lifelong learning experience. Mr. Sam Lowry has served as the Colorado 4-H office for the last 7 years as a state 4-H youth development specialist. In his position, he provides 4-H program leadership and guidance to 4-H county agents in the horse, livestock, and shooting sports programs and project areas. Sam works diligently to ensure that 4-H programs are delivered in a manner where youth can learn, grow, thrive, and be safe physically, socially, and emotionally. He holds a bachelor's degree and master's degree in agricultural biology from New Mexico State University. Thank you for joining us, Sam. Dr. Michael Pate is a former agriculture teacher in Arkansas who earned his PhD in agricultural education from Iowa State University. His research focuses on the safety and health of individuals working in production agriculture. Dr. Pate has worked with the USDA NIFA funded program, Safety in Agriculture for Youth, since 2013. And he currently leads a HICAHS Center project involving agricultural education teachers in Montana, Utah, and South Dakota. Dr. Pate believes that without the crucial element of human labor, agriculture could not exist. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. Dr. Marsha Salzwedel, I have to turn my page, sorry. Dr. Salzwedel's career focuses on safeguarding children in the agricultural environment. She began working as an agricultural youth safety specialist in 2011 at the National Children's Center for Rural and Agriculture Health and Safety and the National Farm Medicine Center in Marshfield, Wisconsin. Dr. Salzwedel's education and experience in business administration, leadership, and as an educator pair well with her many years of experience working with youth to carry out projects in the Children's Center. Her work has been enhanced by having grown up on a farm, which helps her understand farm culture, traditions, and challenges. And she's brought all of these skills to the work that she's done with the National Children's Center. And we're just delighted to have all of you join us. So let's start with some introduction questions that help us set the stage for youth safety and help us get to know each other and to know each of the panelists. Marsha, I'd like to start with you. The Children's Center focuses on children of all ages, younger children and youth. How do farm safety concerns differ between the two?
So as you mentioned earlier, the agricultural environment is highly hazardous, and it's also unique as far as occupational environments go because it's one of the only industries in the country where we can see children of any age, including very young children. And so we have babies and toddlers all the way up through teens that are actually in the environment. The way that this can be different, the effects on the environments can be different though, is because when we see younger children in this worksite environment, it's typically in a different, they're there for different reasons. Younger children tend to be there because the parents have taken them into that environment, whereas older children tend to be there because they may be working in that environment and doing tasks. And so we have injuries and fatalities, of course, that occur daily in this environment. Every day we have 33 children that are injured, seriously injured in this environment. And about every 3 days we have a child or a youth that dies. And one of the other ways that this varies by age is that about 60% of these serious injuries that happen to those younger children. They happen to children that are not working. On the other hand, when we're talking about fatalities, we know that more youth die working in agriculture than in all other industries combined. So the fatalities are a big concern for our working youth. And so that's just one of the many ways that the differences are seen by age in this agricultural environment. The causes of these injuries and fatalities, however, tend to be somewhat similar across the working youth and the non-working youth, with tractors and machineries being on the lead, and then also falls, animals, and drowning.
That was a wonderful lead in to my question for Dee, which is tractor safety seems to be a consistent area area of work in youth safety. Can you talk about your work in this area and establishing a culture of safety when it comes to youth?
Yes, I'm an extension safety specialist here in Ohio, and surveillance is a very large part of what I do. That's one of my applied research focuses. And people look at me and say, but why do you need to know about where the injuries are and how's the demographics affected? And I said, how can you fix the problem without knowing where the youth are at? When I look at what's going on, not just within Ohio, but then nationwide, just as Marsha had explained, tractors and machinery make up the bulk of our injuries. In Ohio, they are 65% of my fatalities between tractors and machinery. And then when I look at my youth demographic, anywhere from 27 to 33% of my fatalities are to young people under the age of 20. So I need to know that in order to know how can we remedy that and how can we design tractor safety programs, machinery safety programs that involve the youth demographic. We have a large gathering of students that are coming up through, whether they're in an ag science program or they're just working in rural industry, they're working in their communities, they're mowing lawns, they're doing a lot of work around machinery. And those tractors, the horsepower on tractors, the legislation talks about a 20 horsepower tractor. Well, my garden mower right now has that, and it has a PTO shaft, and it has a lot of functions that maybe we didn't have in other days. When we have young people operating this type of equipment, I'm just not sure about where they get their education and who's their role models. And so when we think about that culture of safety, we have to know first, how are the children exposed? What are their dangers? Are they actually working, or are they bystanders? And then what are their career aspirations? Are they wanting to get involved? Not just on the farm, but just contributing to that rural lifestyle. And so then who do we have to help us embody that whole environment? Is it within the school programs? Is it the community? Is it the parents? And then is it also the people who hire the young people, as far as the supervisors go? So looking at the surveillance, looking at the prevention programs, the messaging, and then who do we reach out to? That's really where I've focused a lot of my work, thinking about how do we impact those fatalities. And the good thing about those statistics, because we never want to lead with the statistics, but we want to leave you with the message that we're doing a good job. We're doing a better job, I should say, than where we were in 1980, 1990s, when some of this was happening. And people tell me, well, maybe that's just not the students involved in the work anymore. And I said, oh no, they're out there. And they continue to want to be in agriculture. And we have a lot of people entering the agricultural industry. They find it fun and interesting, whereas maybe back in the 80s, it was more of a, you had to work in that area if that was the only thing you wanted to do. So I think the numbers are going in the right direction. I don't know if it's because we're educating more, we're having forums such as this, or that, you know, the generation that we're working with is more receptive to listening to our safety messages and more receptive to putting in some practice in place. We have a long way to go to that 0 fatality, 0 injury. But that's the kind of culture that I'm excited to be a part of, is trying to make that difference.
Thank you, Dee. So, Michael, can you tell us a little bit about the goals and strategies of your current HICAHS projects and the potential teachers have as safety influencers?
Yeah, for sure. So this really is a great segue from Dee's work, and particularly the culture of safety. So my project here at HICAHS looks at agriculture teachers as being one of those social influencers within students' core network. If you look at what Dee was sharing, you have parents, employers, as well as these individuals who are maybe community role models. So if we look at teachers, and there's a lot of research out there of how folks become aware of how to farm properly. If you look at their article out of the Journal of Agricultural Safety and Health, where they talk about the farm apprenticeship model, we're looking at different systems that an individual fits within. So the individual, their actions and their behaviors fit within a microsystem and then a macro system. So that microsystem could be a teacher. And this project, really the goal is to really develop a program that provides a way to connect all those systems to help influence the individual's behavior. So we're working with teachers to help them utilize these resources and to encourage safety practices and work environments that employ these young workers. So we're focusing on those work-based learning experiences where you have students who may work alongside family members, supervisors, employers in agricultural operation, and that's where they're going to gain their career skills. So part of my work has been that agriculture education piece, in which we're trying to bring up the next generation, and that culture of safety is embedded within their system as they view work in agriculture. Because we're not looking at just agricultural sustainability, not just land, water, and finite resources, but we're actually looking at the sustainability of human labor, the people who are in agriculture. Because as we can see, you know, those individuals are important to sustaining the production line. As we look at the environment to the end goal of food products on our table, we can see what has happened with the COVID pandemic. There's been a breakdown in the system, whether it be workers in the meat processing plants or feedlot workers. There's an element of occupational health and hygiene that we as influencers in the macro system, we're looking at policy, educational programmers, people who are out there helping the people in the microsystem, such as the teachers, extension agents, develop those students to change their behavior and their thoughts. And so really one of the bigger goals is to help train that trainer, the agriculture educator, and to helping them implement these different programs to influence the workplace experiences through their community network. So kind of ran really fast there. I hope I got really excited. So.
Well, and I know that you had quite an experience pivoting because of the pandemic with the kind of work that you were doing. And I think it holds promise for the future to reach even more teachers, because you weren't able to physically be there, but you had to manage that experience as well. So moving on, Sam, 4-H is another vital way for youth to gain life skills. Can you talk about how Colorado 4-H incorporates safety in its programs?
Absolutely. Kind of to build on the common theme of culture and culture of safety that we've heard about so far. All 4-H programs have safety of our members and volunteers in mind at the core of each project and program. A lot of our 4-H members enroll in projects that are agricultural in nature and ag related. So certainly there's lots of added safety concepts that come into those programs and project areas. The main concept that I want to share today, I think, in relation to how we incorporate safety in our projects and our programs is simply ages and stages. It goes back to something Dee kind of touched on in terms of knowing who our audience is. We work with a wide age range of youth, 8 to 18 in 4-H programming. And so there's certainly a lot of development that happens in that age range from being 8 years old to 18. And 4-H programming, not only in Colorado 4-H, but nationwide, is designed as such, using research-based material and information to put youth in a situation to succeed and to do so safely based on what they are capable of. Certainly there's a lot of physical differences between an 8-year-old and an 18-year-old, strength, dexterity, things of that sort, as well as cognitive ability and memory, attention span, things like that. So those are all taken into account regardless of the activity or the project or what's going on, whether it be showing a steer or a lamb or baking a cake or doing a sewing project. We're certainly not going to put our members or our volunteers in a situation that they physically cannot succeed and do so safely in regards to their age and stage of development. But also, we really try and emphasize a safe and inclusive learning environment. There's a lot of non-physical safety factors that come into play when working with youth, especially as we go up that developmental ladder in that age range. Things like embarrassment. You know, I might have grown up in a family where, hey, giving a son or a daughter a hard time in a joking manner might be okay in my family, but that might not be okay for another youth or participant for that matter, based on what we don't know about their background and what's going on in their life. So we have to be mindful about things as simple as that in terms of that 8-year-old and 18-year-old. There's lots of differences there. So without getting too far off into the weeds and all that, I think it all goes back to ages and stages and making sure that we are putting our youth members and our volunteers who work with those youth in situations that are crafted to allow them to succeed at whatever it is they're doing and do it in a safe physical manner, but also those intangible things that might not come to mind initially, that social emotional safety factor that is becoming more and more of a prevalent and important factor as we move forward in the world that we live in.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm sure that your comments about ages and stages resonated with all the panelists, but maybe especially with Marsha and the work that they've been doing at the Children's Center. So now that we've heard a little bit of background from each of you, let's open the discussion across the panelists. So the first question I have prepared is, what policy efforts have been made to address youth safety in agriculture? So Dee, would you like to take a stab at that first for us? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Give me the policy question. Absolutely. That was actually where my my dissertation was in. So I don't know if you knew that about me, Loran. I took a look at what was called the Hazardous Occupations Order in Agriculture, affectionately known as AgHOs. In some of the high schools and the 4-H programs, they knew this as tractor certification program. But what we know about this public policy, it was put in place in 1968 by our Secretary of Labor, And at that time, in 1968, they established 11 hazardous occupations, 11 tasks that they deemed hazardous for young people under the age of 16 to participate in. I'm not sure why they chose the age of 16. That was for others to debate. But it involved tractors over the 20 horsepower. It involved the types of machinery that I had mentioned before. If you attach a piece of equipment to a tractor, that would count. But it also included some of the freestanding self-propelled equipment like combines, corn pickers, cotton pickers. It has crop dryers and rotary tillers are listed on there. Power post diggers and post drivers are on there. Also working with livestock. Mostly they're concerned with working with the stud animals or the maternal instincts of when a mother animal would have some young with them. There was felling and bucking and skidding of timber, anything bigger than a 6-inch diameter of those trees that they would fell, working from a ladder over 20 feet, transporting and transferring anhydrous ammonia, which we understand that might be hazardous, but they made sure we listed that. There was blasting agents listed, which maybe back in 1968 we had that. And we had applying restricted use chemicals, which now has been a little bit, a lot more remedied by the worker protection standards and some of the work we do with pesticide applicator training. It was also working with around manure pits, horizontal silos, fruit storages, anywhere that would have maybe an oxygen deficient atmosphere. And the reason I bring up some of these examples is that certainly those hazards still exist, but this legislation has not been updated since 1968. So I think about what would we include into these types of policies if we were writing it again today? Where are our skid loaders, our ATVs and UTVs, that we see those into our surveillance and our injury causing agents, but they're not regulated by any means. So the list that they put together was put together for good purposes back in that day. Since that time, we have not updated this. There was a chance to update it, and whether you take the side that we should have updated it or didn't update it, we as safety professionals knew that we had that chance. Department of Labor made an effort to make a change. So where they were talking about young people working on ladders at 20 feet, the change was working at ladders at 6 feet, which is what you see maybe in the construction industry where you have to have fall protection and things. So they took very scientific basis for what they were changing, and they just put this out there as some changes. They continued to include the livestock, the tractors, those types of things. However, it caught a lot of us off guard, including the people working in this area, because I remember that fateful day. It was the Friday before Labor Day when this came out for public comment, and instantly I'm reading through there going, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. So I spent a lot of time in the office that week just reading through there. As a result of this, this was during the Obama administration that this change was being proposed. There were over 9,000 and some comments, close to 10,000 public comments, which normally are not received in a document like this, especially when you release them like right before a federal holiday and you're hoping nobody notices that comes out. Where am I going with all this? I'm going with all this is that after that many comments, and they were for and against, a lot of people we found did not understand the public policy. You know, it was things like this shouldn't, you're not going to affect what my children do on my farm. And what they didn't understand was this was for youth working for hire. So I look at Michael, and he's got a lot of materials for those SAEs, those supervised ag experiences. And I think about what a great opportunity as we're sending young people out into the workplace. How do we prepare them for these hazardous tasks, and how can we develop materials for this? how do we have an opportunity to update some of the tasks that young people are doing, just to update that. But the bottom line was, let's just stop what we're doing. It's obviously causing a concern, especially within our agricultural supporting communities. People that didn't understand that there was an education exemption known as the tractor certification training, where you can take the training at 14 and 15 and 16, and then get your certification and go work for hire. So I think sometimes public policy, especially when it comes to youth, it can be polarized. I was always taking the approach of, can we make the improvements? Can we educate? And so at this point, we have to think about, where can we focus on some of those challenges, and where can we help people understand what's currently in place? Can we make improvements without getting, everyone very polarized over the topic? But children are an important part of our culture, and I'm not an advocate to keep them off the farms. I want them to be as safe as possible and learn that responsibility, and keeping them involved in agriculture. But at the same time, we have to know that there are some children without voices. And so policy is one of those places then where we can help those students that have maybe are in a situation that they don't have someone speaking up for them. So that's my long-winded hazardous occupations order example.
Thank you so much, Dee. And Marsha, do you have anything to add?
So as Dee mentioned, about a decade ago, there was a lot of what we tend to call brouhaha over these proposed orders. And interestingly enough, as Dee mentioned, a lot of the uproar over them was because people didn't really understand what they were saying. We had heard a lot of things like, you just don't want kids working on farms anymore, or, farm parents saying that you can't tell me what to do with my children on my own farm. And as she mentioned, these orders didn't even affect farm families. It was only for youth that were working on somebody else's farm that they would have even been effective or in effect on. So one of the things that we've tried to do since that time, given the inability to get those hazardous orders updated, is to try to put forward some voluntary guidelines for parents to be able to use. So one of the things that we talked about, or I mentioned earlier, is that there are more youth that die working in agriculture than all other industries combined. And we know that one of the main causes for that is a mismatch between a youth's abilities, kind of what Sam was talking about a little while ago, about ages and stages of development. And before we are assigning these youth on farms these tasks to do, we really need to be able to assess what their abilities are. And if we can match their abilities to the tasks that they're doing, we could eliminate a lot of the injuries and the fatalities that we're seeing to working youth on farms. And so we developed some agricultural youth work guidelines, and that is exactly what they do. They talk about what the abilities are that youth need to have. They talk about the hazards, the protective strategies, those types of things like that. So if we developed these and actually updated them, because they had already been in existence, but we updated them and started pushing them out there as an alternative to the updates that didn't get passed on. And then in addition to that, there's engineering solutions that can be used as well. Things like rollover protective structures on tractors used with seat belts. We know that in a rollover incident that those can prevent 99% of fatalities. But with all of these things, whether it's voluntary youth work guidelines, and we have agritourism guidelines for visiting youth as well, and visiting adults, or whether it's engineering solutions like ROPS and seatbelts, none of it's going to work if we don't educate our end users, our farmers, our farm parents, our farm supervisors on what's out there, what's available, and how it can be used to protect our youth. Because really those youth are the future of our farms.
Thank you so much, Marsha. And I think that leads in nicely to the next question. And so, Michael, you can start thinking about it as I'm asking it. Given our country's current divided political and cultural environments, and that safety is perceived as a charged topic. And we've heard quite a bit about it so far. How have you seen that play out in relation to youth and agriculture?
Like one of our panelists has talked about earlier about the ideas that we want to prevent youth from being engaged in production agriculture. I think that's partly an issue in communication and trust. When we look at the ability to have these tough conversations, there's a lot of tender things that we need to take into account. I think Sam mentioned several of those, like different cultural values. Like we look at our production agriculture, it's never like the same. You have geographic regions where production practices are influenced by either the climate or weather, or the types of soil they have, or the availability of water, or the whole cultural practices of what foods they would like to grow. When we consider putting out things and engaging stakeholders to support a policy or a culture of safety, we need to consider their culture as well. And I think that trust and collectively working together to build a basic value assumption about why we're doing what we're doing. It's not that everybody's like, no, there's not really a person that would say, hey, safety and health is bad. I mean, it's not bad. I would agree. Anybody would agree with you that well-being is something that everybody wants to achieve. They want to be safe, well, and healthy. I don't think anybody was supposed to say, I'm just going to, hurt myself today at work. I don't think so. They want to be able to come back to work and contribute, have some value in the work that they do, and bring home a paycheck. I don't think that's an issue there. When we look at agriculture and we look at youth, they are really our future, right? We look at their preparation for work. I mean, I think there's some data out there. I think it's like 6 or 7 out of 10 individuals will be living in a city. We have the fewest amount of people in our population that's engaged in production hours, less than 2%. When we look at the safety, we have so few workers and so many injuries that it's just not sustainable. And having that kind of like, let's wrap our head around the problem. And we want youth to be that next future, right? Like when it becomes an issue that damages society, I think we're going to be able to make some progress, and understanding that it's not just the farmer, it's just not just the worker, it's not just the youth, it's homework, it's public places, it's the things that we see in our like grocery stores. Those things are interconnected. It's a system, and having the way to have like interconnectedness, I think we got to work on that, showing everything is interconnected. I think we got to have participation from these groups, and I think we have to start with trust and showing, this is what we're about. It's not like we're saying all these things are bad, but are these things helpful? If it's not helpful for the youth development, why are we doing it, right? So I hope that kind of helped. Anybody want to add into it? I mean, Dee?
Well, no, I think you're right there. We have to generate this type of passion, this type of excitement, this type of energy, not just for the student, like for their safety and for everyone to buy into that. And that's our role, Michael, right? And I'm going to look at Marsha too, and also Sam, who work a lot with young people and adults that manage young people.
So I have a question for Sam. With your experience working with 4-H and also with the parents of the youth that you work with, do you have some thoughts or recommendations on engaging parents in creating safe and inclusive environments for youth?
Sure. I think it kind of comes back to some of what Michael alluded to in terms of who doesn't want to be safe and healthy at the fundamental root of anything we're doing, however big or small, who really doesn't want to be safe and healthy. And so when it comes to 4-H programming and project interaction between volunteers and youth, or 4-H agents and youth, or parents and youth, that's what's really neat about about 4-H programming is we're there to teach life skills. We use the program or the project as the vehicle. So certainly there's a lot of intangible learning that's happening there. So we really don't care about the political points of view or the perceptions that might differ. We care about that environment that's a safe place for people to learn and explore the project itself, and then learn some of those intangible life skills as well. So now that's not always as easily done as it is said out loud, but that's what I have found has been successful in my work, is kind of setting that baseline with volunteers, with parents, with folks that you interact with, youth. Say, hey, we're here to learn about how to safely handle and interact with your show steer or your show lamb. And here's some research-based, very fundamental, very straightforward things that you need to know how to do to keep yourself safe, the animal safe, and those around you safe. And I'm using a livestock project just as an example. The same could be said for a sewing project or a creative arts project of some sort. So I think setting that expectation that this is how we're going to learn how to do this and keep everybody safe from a physical standpoint, setting that precedent early. You're entitled to your opinion. You're entitled to the way you think things should be done. However, when we're in 4-H mode and we're learning in a 4-H setting, this is the expectation, and we're all going to learn how to do this safely, and we're going to keep in mind that environment as well, and we're going to be mindful of others and how we interact with those people. So I think my recommendation, or what I have seen work in my own experiences, is just getting out in front of that, setting that expectation, and don't really allow an avenue for a lot of things that don't really relate to what we're trying to achieve in teaching youth aspects of safety, regardless of what it is. We obviously want to encourage conversation and sharing of ideas as they relate to what we're trying to accomplish, but not necessarily outside of that realm. So hopefully that'll shine a little bit of light on my experience and what I have seen as a good starting point.
So I'd like to open this up to all of you to think about, and let Marsha, do you have
I'd
something
like to
you want to weigh in
comment
now?
Yeah, I would.
Oh,
I
go
would
ahead.
like to comment on that a little bit. So just as a farm kid, you mentioned, Loran, when you introduced us, that I grew up on a farm, and I very distinctly remember my dad saying, nobody's coming onto my farm and telling me what to do. And that's totally how his generation of farmers perceived regulation and that type of directives. And it wouldn't matter if at that point in time, I don't think it would have mattered to him if it was a governmental official like an OSHA person coming onto his farm, or if it was a safety and health professional coming onto his farm. That was the kind of attitude that he had. And just kind of circling around to a comment that Jenna Gibbs made in the chat box, as I work with younger parents, some more of the millennial generation, and even some of the teens themselves, we're seeing a little bit of a change in that type of an attitude. And it might be due to the fact that a lot of these people grew up wearing seatbelts, and they grew up wearing bicycle helmets, and they're simply more used to using safety innovations. But it's becoming a little bit easier, and they're a little bit more accepting of that safety culture. There are still some areas where we walk into a little bit of what I like to call almost like a brick wall. And that is when we start hitting into areas of like farming traditions. And so, for instance, we launched a campaign a few years back called Keep Kids Off of Tractors. And it all focuses on not taking young children for rides on tractors. And one of the campaign slogans was, "It's easier to bury a tradition than a child." And another one talked about the tractor is not the place to spend quality time with your children. And we got a lot of pushback and a lot of lashback from the farming community on that particular campaign, because it was a very strong tradition in a lot of their families for them to take children for rides on the tractors. And so we weren't just trying to talk to them about being safe, but we actually at that point were bucking their family traditions. And that in that cultural scenario, that becomes a lot tougher when you start doing that. And then again, referencing something Jenna said in the chat, the presence of COVID over the course of the last year has both made that easier and more difficult. It's made it easier because I think people are a little bit more receptive to some of our safety and health things, like washing hands has become a lot more acceptable. Wearing dust masks has become a lot more acceptable. And so in that respect, it's become a little easier. It's become tougher though, because we've had less access to daycare in rural areas. We've had children off school, either going virtually or just at home. And they were at home during more dangerous times of the year, like during planting season and during harvesting season. So that made it a little bit more challenging as well. So I think that culture very much plays into what we're dealing with. But like Sam said, with the younger youth, and Jenna referred to in her chat as well, I think it's easier working with the younger youth because they're just simply more used to practicing safety with seatbelts, with bicycle helmets, and hopefully now moving forward on farms.
So I think I'd like to shift directions and have each of you give us a comment on where you feel like you've had success improving improving safety for youth in agriculture. So let's start with Sam.
Well, I think from a 4-H programming standpoint, maybe not directly related to the family farm or the industry itself, I feel like some of the work that I've done and experienced really kind of sets that stage. You see those youth get into a habit of thinking about safety. I mean, I work with horse, livestock, and shooting sports programming. So we have lots and lots of safety guidelines and rules and things that we teach and expect out of our members and volunteers. And it's really neat to see that cultural trend build and grow in terms of anytime those youth are working with their animal or participating with their archery project or what have you, that has become habitual for them. Oh, I've got to have my my PPE. I've got to have my arm guard or my earplugs or my safety glasses, and I don't do anything unless the leader gives the instruction to do so, or I need to make sure I know where the flight zones are for this animal that I'm trying to move from this pen to this pen. And it becomes second nature. And it's because we set that expectation, from the 4-H club level, the county level, all the way up to the state level. There's been that consistency, the expectation of the agents, the volunteers, and the members and families involved. This is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to keep you and everybody else safe, and the livestock and animals we work with safe. And so I think in my mind, that's where I've seen success and something that I'm proud of just in my time working within 4-H programming is you can kind of see that cultural effect take hold and really start to grow, because then they don't know any different than to do the things that we would hope they would be doing to keep themselves and others safe. That might be a pie in the sky view. It's not always perfect. It's not always pretty, but overall, I feel like we've been successful with that.
So Michael, from your perspective.
Man, I to try not to get all shouty because this is really cool. I'm going to give a shameless plug for the Safety in Agriculture for Youth, the clearinghouse, and the belief statement that we had and the youth symposium that we had, that Dee led and Aaron and was a big part of, that the people that we had around the table, the people that we had sign on, and the organizations that were represented, I think we have made tremendous strides in building those communications in the network, and I see that trickle down into, even though I was talking about the microsystem, when I see other students talk to other students and having that kind of accountability, like what Sam was saying, like this, we got to wear our safety glasses, or you know, when we do this activity, we're going to do this, we're going to do it this way. And then as well as like, and I get calls about, you know, when you taught me this, and I had a situation in class, and that, you know, we talked about exactly what we did in the workshop, and you know, it's just those things. And when we're seeing those little successes, and when we see those, you know, if we change one person's behavior, hopefully that connects back and forth between their networks, and just seeing those kinds of successes. You know, when we think about, like when I was at Penn State for a bit, when we saw the ag safety rescue training program play out, and where, you know, the press caught a hold of, you know, the individual who responded to this grain entrapment. They did some quick thinking and understood exactly what's going on. It would be as it was not a good idea that this happened, but the thing that came out of the programming is that we see it implemented and somebody's life was saved. And when we see youth and we see this decline, I think those are our you know, ultimate wins. But when we start seeing this connection and communication and this trust, and we're getting in with other organizations, I think that's a even a bigger win.
So Dee, do you want me to ask the question again?
No, where have we had our successes? I'll limit myself to 2 responses. I teach on campus, and part of my occupation safety health class, which we're just wrapped up this semester, you know, I have these young and adults that are just invincible, right? And they don't need this. But as I watch them over the years, not these students, but the students in general, there really is a change in how they're thinking and what they're doing. And 19 years ago, if I talked about wearing PPE, they'd be like, oh, nobody needs it, you know? And just this last semester, we had a debate of, it was a student that just kind of brought it up and just said, why aren't ag employers providing PPE to their employees similar to general industry? And I just sat back and I just let this conversation play out, because they have internships. And so they've had general industry jobs where they had to wear the PPE. And then all of a sudden they said, ag employers shouldn't be exempt from this. And we also had conversations about, is the small farm exemption really saving lives? If, you know, where we can say fewer than 10 employees. And so I really enjoy those conversations you can have with the future, as we're all talking about the youth being our future. Well, these young people haven't been too far from being youth, and they certainly haven't spent a lot of time in the workforce, but yet they're going to be our managers and the future parents. And so those to me have been great success stories, when you can introduce topics and have them debate them and think about them. And then the other program that I was working on with my students there on campus, but now we're taking that out into the communities, is developing an OSHA and ag program where they can get their 10-hour OSHA general industry card. The high school programs really are looking towards these certificate trainings. Where can they offer, you know, their superintendents want to give more certificates to build on the students' career passports. And when safety can be one of those extra certificates, and they're being very receptive, I think right there is showing us that we have some partners, we have some additional stakeholders that are willing to do things if they're done, you know, and that safety in our clearinghouse, Safety in Agriculture for Youth, has all of that information there. And I appreciate Aaron sending things there in the chat box to send us there for the resources that are up to date, available, and we can certify students. So those are my 2 examples.
I'm feeling so much more hopeful than all those years ago when we started working together, Dee. So Marsha, yours.
So there's a couple that come to mind right away. You heard me talking about the agricultural youth work guidelines, and one of the most exciting things for me working with those is when I get out to the farm tech days, technology days, farm progress days, different states, it's called different things. But anyway, we get out there and we actually start interacting with the farmers and we start introducing them to the agricultural youth work guidelines. And they're initially, you know, you really have to work to get their attention, but once they start looking at them, they get very interested and they get very excited about them. And then they start going, well, what else do you have guidelines for? And then they start not just taking the tractor one, but they'll pick up the one for working with animals and the one for the lawnmower and the one for operating drones. You know, we have 53 different topics that we cover now. So that to me has been a great thing to see, because we know that that saves lives. We know that that reduces injuries and fatalities when people actually use those guidelines and start matching them. And the other area where we've seen a lot of success, and Dee's worked in this area as well, is that in agritourism. And initially I thought that the agritourism guidelines, we have voluntary guidelines for that as well. And I thought initially that that was really receptive to the farm owners to protect those kids coming to visit their farms because of liability issues. You know, it helps them to make their farms safer. It lessens the chances of them getting sued. And so I really thought that that was what was attracting a lot of the farm owners to these types of guidelines, because they are some of our most accessed resources and most used resources out there, are the ones that we've developed for agritourism. And then as I was talking with a couple of the owners, one of them said to me, he said, you know, I get what everybody talks about reducing, you know, liability and everything for the farm. But he said, I want you to know that I just sleep better at night when I know that I've done everything on my farm to protect any kids that are coming out here to visit. And he said, your guidelines and your resources let us do that. And to me, that was such a tremendous win just to hear a farmer say that. So I think that there is hope. I think you're right. I think we're all excited about it. And I think that those little stories and these little wins are what keep us going with what we do.
So with that, I'd like you to think more future emerging issues, some of the things that have been coming up, and I'd like each of you to comment on it. So what are new emerging or re-emerging safety issues or special populations that we need to focus on moving forward? So let's start with Dee.
Sure, then I can take them all from the other panelists, right? Oh, you know, I've had a philosophy for years that safety is a parade, right? And every 20 feet, we have a new audience. And it's maybe a different packaging of our messages. But if we have tractor safety, what do I want to teach tractor safety? And I'm teaching it here, and 20 feet down the road, I need to teach it again. So when I think about those new audiences that need to learn that, you know, where are my small and beginning farmers? Where's my secondary machinery operators? They're buying equipment off of the secondary market, is what I meant to say. And that equipment is coming with missing guards, and seats that don't adjust, and all of the things that we have. So I continue to talk about safety and to this environment. And in my own state, my Amish communities are starting to use tractors on the road. Whereas when I saw them in Tennessee, and they had high-speed tractors on the road in Tennessee, and we talked to them about, you know, they were telling me they were the most progressive Amish in the United States, and I agreed. And now I'm seeing this happening in my own state. And I think now I have another audience. So I just continue that parade. And yes, it's, we have to update the messages, but a lot of times the messages can continue to be duplicated and replicated. And it's just new audiences that need the information. So I don't know if I have an exact, you know, audience that I want to address, except to know that by paying attention to what's going on with the surveillance and the people that are moving into the communities and how they're utilizing the equipment, it just continues to be part of our job to take it to a new population.
So we're getting close to the 2 o'clock hour, to breakout rooms, but I would like to finish this part so that each of you can kind of give a plug for what you see as the most important emerging issues or special populations. So Sam.
Excuse me. I think again from a 4-H perspective, it's maintaining that basis that 4-H has established over the last 100 and some odd years. In general, is how do we maintain what the program has worked so hard to establish? How do we keep tweaking that and making sure that it's relevant? But then how do we take that relevancy and that foundation and use it to push into new and different and potentially underserved populations? And how do we bring those people in and really work with them in the same parameters that we do and have been doing for a long time? And that transcends to just basic communication and project and opportunities to elements of safety. And it all goes back to that, ages and stages and being aware of the culture and the area that you're in. Because if you're working with an underserved population or a specific group of folks in a specific region, things might be totally acceptable and okay in that area and might be taken very differently somewhere else, or you might have to present elements of what you're doing in a different fashion. So on that social and emotional safety spectrum, I think that's always the challenge. Is we're really excited to move into new areas and work with new people, but how do we take the same message, the same information, and the same elements of safety and make sure that we're delivering it in a way that is readily and appropriately absorbed by those new audiences? So I think that's kind of a big generalized exciting thing, but also a challenge that continues to face not just Colorado 4-H, but 4-H programming across the country.
So thanks. Let's go to Marsha.
So I think that one of the biggest challenges we're facing, and I don't know that it's necessarily an emerging issue, but it certainly impacts our emerging issues, and Dee kind of referenced it earlier. Surveillance for children and youth on farms is just tremendously challenging. There's no central database where we can collect those statistics. The funding over the years has decreased. So we don't have a lot of the national surveys that we used to have. And as she mentioned, it's very difficult to address an issue when you don't have good numbers and good information on it. And this becomes even more challenging when you start working with groups like the Anabaptist populations that Dee was referencing, because a lot of the statistics are not available for those groups. They don't utilize a lot of the same areas or do a lot of the same reporting that even some of our other farms do. The other thing that makes it a little bit challenging is trying to keep up with the new technologies. We're seeing drones, we're seeing some equipment in the last couple of decades that's being used on farms that was never used on farms before. We've seen a massive increase in the number of ATVs being used on farms for farm work in the last 20 to 30 years. We're seeing a lot more skid steers used. Those were not originally developed as farm equipment, but we're seeing them used on farms almost across the nation now. And every time somebody finds a new ag use for non-farm equipment, quote unquote, or there's something new coming in like drones, that increases the challenges and it increases some of the issues and the safety concerns that we have. And so between the new technologies and the surveillance, I think both of those very much feed into the emerging issues and what we need to deal with.
Thank you for that. And Michael?
Yeah, I just echo some of the things that have already been mentioned here. Some things like automation for tractors. You see auto guidance type systems. You see people with TikTok getting out of the cab and recording themselves doing that. I know that Jenna put in the comments that social media is a great way to drive things, but there's also sharing of things that are not very helpful to our message. So just those types of things. And I love what Dee said. I've always, as a young safety person and getting to learn from these legends on the panelists here, I've become discouraged sometimes, but what Dee had said is that it's not just, I feel like we're always going to be in a job, and I feel sometimes like I'm not making a difference, but being encouraged to see that it may be that just is the next generation. You still kind of keep trucking. And so special populations out here west, we have native populations. There's also Hispanic, Latino, Latinx that we need to, address. They're coming on. We've got people, migrant workers that we need to consider. Are our programs suitable for that group? They're very hard to reach. Are the communications channels, are the literacy level that they need? Those kinds of things are still there that we'll have to address as well.
So thank you all. We're going to move into the breakout rooms. There'll be a breakout room for